Over the next 2 weeks, I'll be driving my 2024 Tesla Model 3 over 3,000 miles from Ottawa, Canada to Orlando, Florida and back. I might be completely insane for doing this considering I had the base Model 3 with only 265 miles of range, but it's something I've always wanted to try and hopefully I won't regret my decision. Over the years, I've completed dozens of smaller road trips with my Teslas, but they could all be completed within a day or so, and I've always wondered how a Tesla would fare on a much longer trip, how much I'd actually have to stop and charge, and if these required charging sessions would be a pain or a nice relief to stretch my legs. So with that said, sit back and enjoy my 3,000 mile road trip, but first, what are some things I'm bringing with me? Teslas don't come with a spare tire or a jack and four-way wrench, so since I was doing such a long road trip with stretches in the middle of nowhere, I decided to pick these up and keep in the under compartment of the trunk just in case of a flat tire. So this cost me around 130 Canadian dollars, and I'm filming this after my trip. Fortunately, I didn't have to use them, so I ended up returning the items for a refund, but I would absolutely recommend doing the same in case you get a flat tire and are hours away from a garage or service center. Of course, Teslas don't have a spare tire to begin with, so I brought with me a full-sized spare tire from my set of winter tires, which did take quite a bit of room in the trunk for sure, but I think it's well worth the preventative measure. I also brought with us a portable charger, a J1772 adapter, a CCS1 adapter, and a charging extension cord, all of which I already own, so there was no added cost here, and for the record, I didn't use any of them once. The supercharging network in the US was fantastic, and there were more superchargers than we even needed. Now, we actually decided to divide up the trip in 3 days of driving, with the first day being Ottawa to Washington, D.C. for a total of roughly 915 kilometers, which in a normal gas vehicle would take around 9 hours of driving. I read online in forums that a lot of people prefer using this platform called a Better Route Planner, but I didn't use that once. I just stuck to Tesla's platform and didn't have any issues at all. We'll talk more about my overall experience later on in the video. Now, one thing that really confused me on that first day was that the map kept wanting me to do this massive detour that made no sense at all and would have added like 3 hours to the trip. I quickly realized though that it's because I had it set to avoid tolls in the settings, and the most direct way had a $5 toll to cross the Canada-US border. So after turning off that setting, it rerouted me to the quickest route directly to Syracuse, New York. I just wanted to quickly mention that in case you also run into this type of issue, having the no tolls setting on. For the record, I had charged up my Tesla to 100% the night before leaving, and as you can see from this clip here, it was estimating 3 charging stops before arriving to Washington, D.C. by around 5:50 p.m. with an estimate of exactly 60 minutes of charging total. So we set off for the US, watched the sunrise in Canada, and crossed the International Bridge, which was really cool considering how high up in the sky it was. Didn't have any issues at all crossing the border as a Canadian, and the border guard wished us luck driving all the way down to Florida. Along the way though, the Tesla recalculated the trip and had us stop in Parrish, New York instead of Syracuse for that first charge, which was totally fine by us though, because my dog was feeling sick on that first leg of the trip. Overall, for that first day, we still ended up charging only 3 times, and each of the charging stations were completely vacant, offering us the chance to walk around, stretch our legs, and walk our dog. Honestly though, there really wasn't much to look at or do at any of these superchargers. And speaking of superchargers, let's talk about charging speed and cost. Keep in mind, my car is the standard range plus version rear-wheel drive, which has an EPA range estimate of 430 kilometers, but also one disadvantage is that its peak charging speed is lower than say a long-range Model 3. In fact, my car charges at a peak rate of 175 kilowatt hours versus a long-range model, for example, can reach up to 250 kilowatt hours, which is really a big difference when you're constantly charging on a road trip around town it might not be a big deal, but when you're charging periodically every couple of hours, it makes a difference. And this can add many hours of extra time along the way, which it certainly did for us. Now, one of the things I love about owning an EV in Quebec, Canada, is that I've calculated it to cost me around $2 Canadian per 100 kilometers driven when I charge on my at-home level 2 charger, which of course is dirt cheap. In regards to supercharging though, the way it works is that rates will differ depending on the state you're in and the time of day that you're charging your vehicle. So every supercharging stop will cost a different amount. At the end of this video, I'll tally everything up and we'll see how much it cost me to charge. Now, we ended up staying a day in Washington to see the National Mall and the White House, so we did end up driving around during that in-between day, but the following day we hit the road again to reach Savannah, Georgia, which it had estimated 3 charging stops along the way in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. This day of driving was pretty boring, to be honest. There's not much to see along the I-95 to Savannah, but one thing that really surprised me was how quick the supercharging was in warmer temperatures and when the battery was already warm itself. Unlike that first day where the charging sessions were around 20 to 25 minutes, the charging sessions on the second day were much lower, with many of which being in the 10 to 15 minute range, every 2.5 hours to 3 hours of driving, which was the perfect amount of time between stops anyways. So in this respect, supercharging really wasn't a burden as much as I thought it would be on a longer road trip, which was one of my main areas of concern for the trip in general. That charging would, add 10 hours to the trip. Well, it really didn't on the way there, at least. And finally, on the last day of driving to Florida, the car had estimated 1 charge in Kingsland, Georgia for 33 minutes, and that we'd arrive by 12:30 p.m. But we ended up visiting Driftwood Beach on Jekyll Island, which added a couple of hours to the trip and quite a bit more distance driven. We eventually crossed into Florida though and made our way down to Orlando, where we spent 2 nights before then heading to Cocoa Beach as the final destination of the road trip. By the way, I decided along the way that I just wasn't going to vlog the way back because it was just going to make for a much longer video, and we were sick of driving and filming anyways at that point. However, I will include the time and costs of that way back trip in total costs. Alright, so after driving over 3,000 miles on this road trip, how was the experience overall driving in a Tesla? And to be honest, it was fantastic. We didn't run into any issues at all with the car, and charging was much more efficient and quicker than I was expecting. I thought every charging session would be like 30 to 40 minutes, but that was not the case at all, especially as we got into warmer climates. Charging sessions were often 10 to 15 minutes, and that was enough to stretch our legs and use the bathroom anyways. And the reason for this is that the Tesla would bring its charge down to around 10% before stopping to charge, and would then automatically precondition at the required distance away from the supercharger to make sure that charging was as quick as possible, which meant that we'd often only charge from 10 up to 60%, sometimes 70-75%, as the charging is much quicker in that band of charge compared to 70% and higher. So although I was sometimes tempted to charge more just in case, well, I put my trust in the computer's estimates and it was right every single time. In fact, I was really impressed with how accurate the car estimated the charging time required at each charging station, and then the distance that we'd travel on the charge indicated. For example, it would say, 2-3 hours out that we would arrive at the charger at 10% and we'd arrive at 10%. Also, I'd recommend that you strategically pick hotels that have superchargers very close by and to charge up the night before your next leg of the trip so that you can just immediately hit the road the next morning. Trust me, you will thank yourself for doing this. And now the big question, you're probably wondering how much it cost for this entire trip. Well, in total, considering we also visited Washington, DC and Savannah along with surrounding areas, I charged a total of 32 times over basically 2 weeks. This equated to 970 kilowatt hours of energy used on the total trip, which cost $351 in US currency, or around 500 Canadian dollars for myself. Considering my Model 3 has a battery capacity of 57.5 kilowatt hours, this means I basically did 16.8 full battery charges if it were from 0 to 100 each time. Now, on a separate note, I wanted to pay for the charging with my Tesla credits, which I have loaded into my account from referring customers such as yourselves to buying a new Tesla. But since I'm located in Canada, they are not available for US charging. Like, the credits don't apply for some reason, which I think is absolutely ridiculous because it's converting to Canadian dollars and then charging on my Canadian card anyways, but I guess it is what it is. What is crazy though is that in total I charged for 559 minutes, or around 9.3 hours. Make with that what you will, considering that was over 2 weeks and we did a lot of driving around our destinations as well, but it's definitely a lot nonetheless. So yeah, overall the trip was way better than I was initially even expecting that it would go. It was a long trip in and of itself, but was great in the Tesla overall. And I would do another longer road trip in the Tesla, but you know, going down to Florida, that's just a lot of driving even in a gas vehicle. If you're interested in supporting the channel and buying some great accessories for your Tesla, make sure to check out my Amazon storefront, link down below in this video's description and pinned comment. Really helps support the channel. If you're interested in more Tesla content like today's video, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more upcoming videos and check out one of these two videos right here about Tesla charging. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.